My name is Kira and I'm with you guys today from Cheltenham, the United Kingdom. I hope everyone's having an awesome time over in South Carolina. I had a look at the weather and it's pretty warm where you guys are, so I'm very jealous as it's about 8 degrees here in the UK. But such is life, so let's get into my awesome presentation about international SEO. Before I get into the techie stuff, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kira Korishlova and I'm a UK-based international SEO specialist and the founder of Diary of an SEO. We help local and global clients. We mainly work with global enterprises to help expand them into different countries around the world. So this could be anywhere from 2 countries if they're expanding from the UK over to the US, or 67. So we try to help them any way we can and deliver an efficient and revenue increasing global strategy. So I will just share a little bit about how to make millions with international SEO, both for you and your clients, also known as how to roll out a large-scale international SEO strategy without messing it up. To start off with, you need to pick your poison, and that just means pick your international SEO structure. So there are main 3 types. The first one is a country code top-level domain, which could be an example, amazon.ca, so that's Amazon Canada. You've got subdomains, which would be uk.trip.com, and in fact, a lot of marketplaces use this structure, for example, Fiverr, and subdirectories such as Apple, which would be apple.com/fr for friends. If we analyze this a little bit deeper, you've got the country code top level domain, so a CCTLD, and as I mentioned, the example of this is amazon.ca. This is just the part of a website address that shows where the country is from and the country that you're trying to target. So .uk is for the United Kingdom, for example. It is essentially a little flag at the end of a web address to tell you where the website is based. It's got lots of pros, but whenever there's a pro, there's a con. There's clear geo-targeting. You've got server locations that are irrelevant because obviously you are based in that country. It's quite an easy separation of sites. It's good for larger corporations, and this is why Amazon would opt for such a structure, and it's quite good for legal compliance. The cons, however, are that it's really expensive to maintain. So you've got, say you're expanding to 67 different countries and you've got CCTLDs for every single one of them, that would be quite expensive to run because that's 67 separate websites to manage. It requires more infrastructure, and this is not just in terms of the website, but also in terms of the autonomy over those websites. So you technically would have multiple dashboards for all of these domains. So people who have, say, franchises or headquarters in multiple countries, it would work really well for them because you've got different teams managing, but it wouldn't work so well if it's a smaller team, for example. And you can only target a single country, and this may cause SEO difficulties. So keep in mind that these are separate domains, even though you can specify for international SEO that they do relate to each other and they're just variations of each other. They're still separate domains. So the authority is not being passed as easily as it would when you're using other structures. Next, you've got the subdomain. So this example is uk.trip.com, and that is a separate section of the main website. So it's a part of the main domain, and it's an additional section that you use, such as a blog, for example. So HID Global, the global accessibility company, they've got a subdomain which is blog.trip.com. So you might see on a lot of websites, freelance marketplaces, you could have something like app.website.com or login.website.com. So those are all subdomains, but it is still connected to the main website. And in the case of trip.com, this example is for the UK. So trip.com have multiple subdomains for different countries. The good thing about this one is that it's really easy to set up. You can have multiple server locations because it's still a subdomain. It's quite a clear and easy separation of sites, and there's also autonomy between businesses. So again, you have your individual dashboard that you can manage the websites through. The only thing that's not so great about this is that it dilutes your domain authority. So again, exactly like a ccTLD, this is not a singular domain. This takes away the authority from the main domain. It can be confusing for users, especially if it's implemented incorrectly. And then the authority distribution is obviously not as clear across those subdomains. Because of all of this, it can cause quite a bit of cannibalization. So setting up the correct hreflang for these subdomains is crucial if you are going for this type of structure. The final one, and my preferred one, is a subdirectory. So it's essentially a subfolder of the main domain. So as opposed to the previous examples, the authority is consolidated under one domain because you've got subfolders, so variations of one main domain. It is kind of easy to set up, so none of these are actually easy, but it's possibly the easiest one out of all of them. It is relatively low maintenance, and when I say low maintenance, it doesn't mean it's, once and done. You do have to maintain it a lot, but at least it's in one place. And some of the cons are that you only get a single server location, so you do have to use a CDN a lot of the time, a content delivery network, which helps you bounce off servers near whichever country you're targeting to speed up page load and decrease those issues of slow loading times. And in terms of business autonomy, the separation of sites is a little bit harder because the dashboard is all the same, so it's all in one place. And actually, a lot of corporates, they don't want to opt for the subdirectory structure, regardless of the SEO benefits, purely because of the autonomy structure. So this happens when it's a big company. They don't really want to share the authority. They are quite protective over their domains. So this would be a consideration. hreflang is one of the most important parts of international SEO, so it is worth us understanding what it actually is. So it's just a tag that helps search engines serve the correct language or the regional URL in search results. As you can see at the example on this slide, you've got the language value, the country value, and the indexable URL. So in this case, the language is English, EN, the country value is US, and the indexable URL is whatever your website is. hreflang in action. So if you have implemented hreflang correctly, you should technically see these results in those countries. So I should not be seeing this sitting here in the UK. All I should be seeing is Apple UK when I go and try to pre-order the new iPhone. If I'm in Singapore, you would see Apple Singapore and Apple Vietnam. So for Apple, this is really important because when people try to go to their website, you will not be able to pre-order the new iPhone 16 from the Vietnamese subfolder if you're in the UK. That is going to cause a lot of issues, currency, the law, shipping times, and it's just confusing. So you should be able to see your individual version specific to your country. When is hreflang used? So there are multiple instances and these can get a little bit confusing. The first one is when you have a fully translated website version, or you've got different versions in the same language but targeting different countries. So I would have, if I'm targeting Singapore in the UK, I would have English for the UK and I would have English for Singapore. So that's the same language, different countries. Then you've got different language targeting the same country. So an example of this would be a multilingual website, which would be a Canadian website in Quebec. So as you guys know, in Quebec, there are two national languages, which is French and English. So most websites are in French and English. So that's one country, multiple language. Then you've got country-specific content. So it's targeting different countries with either translated versions or same language versions for multiple countries. You've got regional variations in language, which would be British versus American English. And you've got user-generated content, language options, which could be Reddit or Legiit Marketplace. I want to circle back onto the example of regional variations in language. A really great example would be BE and AMI, so British English and American English. This is an example from one of my clients who target both the UK and the States. And there's a quick example in the small paragraph. I will give you a couple of seconds to just have a look at the first line and see if I'm targeting the UK, what would change. 3, 2, 1, and there we go. So if you are in the UK, this spelling would be different. So that is a regional variation in your language. You would replace the Z or the Z, whatever you want to call it, with an S. So even those tiny changes make a very big difference, especially in 2024 and will continue in 2025. So very small changes that focus on the cultural variation to your language will make an impact in visibility. In terms of multilingual websites, the Canadian example, so this is McGill University's website. This is the same page. I don't speak French, but I did translate this on Google Translate and it is the same. This is one page, one in English, one in French. So one is for the English Googler or the English searcher, and the other version is obviously the French version for whoever wants to Google it in French. You've got country-specific content. So back to Apple, you've got CA, AU, and FR, and that's Canada, Australia, and France. And as you can see above, it gives you an option to choose where you want to browse from. And the reason it's doing this, because I put this presentation in the UK, but this language, I think that's French maybe, or Italian. So the IP is redirecting me back to the UK, but it gives me an option of where I want to shop. So this is actually very useful, and we will touch on this after I go through these slides in terms of IP redirects and how they can be a pro and a con. Now, there are a couple of ways to implement hreflang attributes. You've got 3 main ways. You've got via the HTML tags. So you add the hreflang tag within the head section of your web page. And this can get really time consuming and a little bit messy. So you do have to really know what you're doing. I have seen websites, large corporate websites, implement these tags through HTML. However, a lot of the time it does not work as well. It is great for smaller websites. So for example, if I have a US-UK website, there's no problem implementing it via HTML. That would just be a personal preference. The only issue with that might be the crawlability and the indexing turnaround. But I will get into that when we get onto sitemaps. You've got the HTTP headers, so that is for non-HTML pages such as PDFs, and these HTTP headers specify the relative language of the variants. So it's obviously best for non-HTML content, but it is quite inconsistent, it is not flexible, and it requires server-side configuration. So you are going to get your developer on board, and it can get a bit tricky. But if you have very useful PDF content or non-HTML content, then you can use it in tandem with other versions. The last version and the most preferred version, at least for me, is the sitemap. And what I mentioned in the first implementation tactic, so HTML, with the sitemap, all of your pages are within one single file, which makes it easier for Google to crawl and gives you a faster indexing turnaround time. So instead of bouncing per page, seeing those links and trying to index them, you've got one single file with every single variation of that page. And we have seen, when you compare it to HTML tags, sitemaps actually do bring more value and a quicker ranking improvement time when we're rolling out international SEO strategies for that reason exactly. So the indexing is far quicker. And it is the easiest, the most convenient way to do things, and it's easiest to manage, and it is the most reliable option as well. But it is not as granular, and it is not on page level, which in my opinion is not really a problem because the pros outweigh the cons in this case. And also there are a plethora of tools that actually help you with the implementation. I would like to share a case study with you. So this is from one of my clients and how we grew their international traffic by miles. So this is the Corporation X case study. They were targeting 67 countries with 67 individual websites. They had identical content and they didn't have hreflang in place and pretty poor visibility in all regions. So this case is kind of dire. Usually an international business would kind of know what they're doing from the start, but these guys, they really needed help. The only visibility they had really was the .com domain, that was their US global domain, and their UK domain. So the rescue procedure, as I like to call it, is we went with the subdirectory structure and created 66 additional subdirectories on top of their US/.com, their global top-level domain. We implemented an hreflang structure for all the location with fallback default, so setting an X default for all the locations. We segmented the country's subdirectories as regional categories on the .com global top-level domain. What we did, this was for usability more than anything else. So if someone lands on the homepage for whatever reason, they've got all these geographical locations that they can easily navigate to. So we had the Africas, the Americas, APAC, Europe, and the Middle East. We preserved existing content with hreflang annotation. So we told Google that this is not a duplicate version, this is just a variation, and created region-specific content to follow cultural nuance. Obviously, these 67 countries, they're not the same, nor are they on the same continent even. So we had to establish a clear structure for all of these countries, obviously based on their search volume, their purchasing intent, their conversion intent, and just the culture of each country. The results, this is my favorite slide because I love to talk about all the money that I make for my clients. The revenue start was $250,000 in revenue annually. And after we completed our international rollout, so this was over 2 years, it was $2.5 million. So the keywords in the top 3 positions increased by 305%, 97% increase in total conversions, and 1900% increase in organic sessions from this activity. With all this said, with all the technicalities that we have to cover, so hreflang is incredibly important, there's no doubt about it. The structure that you choose, the way you choose to implement it, and if it's correct, that is incredibly important. However, there's something that people always miss, and that is generally the cultural appropriation and the cultural aspect of this whole activity. And to showcase this, to give you a real life example, these are just the countries that, part of that list of 67 that we were working with. And as I said here, different country, different culture, different preference. So you could be selling the same thing. So you can be saying negotiation training to all of these countries with the same commercial landing page, but the text on those pages, even if it's all in English, will be completely different. It has to be tailored to the people that live in those countries because we're all wonderfully different people and we like things that we are used to. So the first example of this is Germany versus USA. First of all, it's just the language delivery, the attention to privacy and the legal complexities. So one big thing that differentiates the US from Germany is the way that people want to buy a service or a product. So in the US, it's a lot more direct. You know, I am the best. Why am I the best? If you're not buying from me, you're not buying from anyone better, essentially. In Germany, it's slightly more conservative in that sense. They prefer slightly less text and more explanation and a bigger target on privacy and a long-term vision. However, in the US, it is slightly different. So you can have a lot more text, you can have images. The attention to privacy, GDPR, is not as intense because obviously we've got the GDPR European laws in Europe, and it's slightly different in the US. Brazil and India, a great example of this would be negotiation strategies. So these countries are wildly different, but they're both obviously amazing. We've got appreciation of time and efficiency. So in Brazil, people like to take their time. In India, people like a quicker turnaround. In Brazil, rapport building and personal relationships are very important. So they would rather solve issues or negotiate at a restaurant over dinner, whereas in India, it's a more traditional hierarchical structure where they like to get to the point a little bit quicker, and it's all based on respect. These two share the same vision of having creative solutions for complex problems, so that is something that was a crossover. And this one, the third example, is really cool because they are incredibly different, these two countries. And you've got Saudi Arabia and Japan. And this example is from an automotive niche. So in Japan, if anyone's been, I would love to go one day. They are a lot more modest in their views. They focus on sustainability and minimalism. Whereas in Saudi Arabia, Middle East, they've got lots of money. They're focusing on kinship, family, and luxury. So premium. And the difference here is that someone from Saudi Arabia would not buy something from a page that is more tailored to the Japanese. So these preferences could not be more different. So when a Japanese citizen would probably go for a more eco-friendly car, like a hybrid, a Saudi Arabian would probably go for a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley or, an old vintage petrol vehicle. So this example is very cool because the growth was quite incredible for all three of these. If you have a look, after we've rolled out our strategy, we saw a 450% increase in sessions to these two countries, to the US and Germany, to those commercial pages. For Brazil and India, we saw an increase of 700%. And for Saudi Arabia and Japan, we saw an increase of 250%. So this is huge growth. And this was after hreflang was already implemented, and we decided to look a little bit deeper into the cultural preference of the citizens that we're trying to target in all of those countries. And that's not to say that everyone is like that. So I definitely do not want to generalize. And I know that everyone's different, everyone's unique. However, the general trend, the general psychology of people living in those countries is that. I know this won't work for everyone, but it definitely works for, say, from 250% to 700% of those people. Now, what's happening with hreflang this year and for the years to come? The awesome thing about it is that we've got AI. AI can be a blessing and a curse, but now it learns to better recognize dialects and regional language variations. So that would be Spanish for Spain, or Spanish for Mexico, or Spanish for Chile. So that would all go back to the cultural variation in language. So your hreflang tagging has to be very precise. So you can't make the mistake of doing Spanish for Spain when you're trying to target Chile, for example. It reduces confusion by directing content to the intended audience, improving search relevance. So this really helps with conversion rates and engagement, as we see here. There's been a 30% increase in engagement from targeted language groups, and followed by an increase in sales. So what this means in layman's terms is that you need to target your content to those people specifically that live in those countries, that speak that language, and be very clear about it. Now, hreflang mistakes and international SEO mistakes. A really big one that I see is a misuse of ISO codes. For example, there's no ENUK, there's only ENGB. And all of the ISO information for the language and country codes, it is readily available on Wikipedia. People have put it together on Reddit. So it is absolutely everywhere. So there's really no excuse not to get it wrong. And there's a lot of languages, so I wouldn't guess. I would just check the ISO codes. Then not checking your hreflang once you've implemented it. So this one is quite interesting because sometimes people think that you can add hreflang and not think about it again. But hreflang is still SEO. You can't just do it and leave it forever. You have to check it. And if your pages change, so if you remove a page, then you have to update your sitemap or your HTML structure or your HTTP header. So it has to change along with your pages changing. Third one is you should only have hreflang tags on pages that you want indexed, because you don't need hreflang on no index pages. And if you implement a tag on a page that points to a different version, it will create a conflict and then you'll get a no return tag error. So what this means, every single variation has to reference itself, its X default, and its sister or brother, so its variation in language. So now you can see how it gets a little bit complicated and how it's quite easy to get it wrong, because there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of tagging from its original version to its sister country or all the countries. So if you have 66 or 67 subdirectories, you've got the UK version. So say I'm on the UK page, it's referencing the X default, it's referencing itself, and it's referencing 66 of its variation pages. The next one is not setting an X default. So this is actually quite a tricky one, because for e-commerce, you wouldn't really need to set an X default, because if you set an X default to, I don't know, America, but you're in the UK, for example, the shipping laws, the pricing is completely different. So you shouldn't really be setting X defaults for e-com websites. You should just be getting it right, so it puts you in the right place. Or you should be setting IP redirects. So that's something I mentioned earlier. IP redirects are really good if you give people a choice, but what a lot of websites do is they force you into whatever IP they think you're at. So in the UK, for example, if I Google Fiverr Brazil, and I click on Fiverr Brazil because it comes up in search, it will automatically send me to the UK Fiverr. So I don't have a choice in going to different options. But an X default for websites like a service provider in, say, negotiation training or wealth management, you could have an X default. If it's both in English especially, you can have UK, US X default set. And what an X default is if Google can't serve either of the most relevant results, it serves the next best thing. So the user always lands on something. Then if you're not self-referencing your hreflang annotation, so this comes back to the very complicated sequence of what elements you have to reference. So self-referencing is basically like a self-referencing canonical. So you reference the version that you're currently working on. So UK has to reference the UK. And if you're copying similar content and translating it site-wide, this is not a great idea, especially now that there's such a focus on quality content. You have to have individual content for all the pages that you are actually trying to rank. This is just a quick example of when hreflang goes wrong. This is an example from the Singapore Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Quick story, I was trying to apply for a visa to go to Singapore to see my friends and my teachers because I grew up there. And I kept trying to apply for this visa, but I couldn't get to the application form in the UK. And that was because their hreflang was wrong. So I did what any other great SEO specialist would do, and I shamed them on LinkedIn, as you can see on the left-hand side. So There was no hreflang implementation where it is necessary. Where there was hreflang, it was incorrect. And there were conflicting HTML headers and sitemap implementation of hreflang. There was also a 301 IP redirect, but it was to the wrong place. So it was just mistake on mistake on mistake. So I brought this up with them, and this is just a quick example. When you search from the UK, you've got visa application Jakarta, and you had Embassy of the Republic of Singapore in Brasilia. So I was in neither of those places, so they're not even close really. So it was pretty irrelevant. I would love for you guys to see this Yoda meme, so I'm moving my photo. So I did bring this up with them. The next day, the website went to maintenance mode and they did fix it, thank God. And now it's all okay. But the moral of the story is not that I shamed them on LinkedIn. The moral of the story is that I was persistent because I needed the visa, but it took me probably an hour to find what I needed to find because of this issue. Your customers will not be as lenient if there is a better version, if there is a better option they can choose from. So this just shows you what can go wrong if your hreflang implementation is incorrect. You do want people to find what they're looking for easily, and this could just be one of the errors that you can have, and you might lose a lot of customers from it. I know I told you guys a lot of stuff today. I absolutely understand that a lot of it is confusing and you probably won't remember probably 85–90% of it. But if you do remember anything, I've got these 4 key points that I would love for you to walk away with and think about. The first one is choose the right international structure for you. If your competitor is doing something, it doesn't mean that you should do it too. It should be whatever works for your business specifically. The next one is focus on quality over quantity and make sure that you're publishing user-first content specific to each region or variation. The third one is check your hreflang tags and maintain them once they've been implemented. And number 4 is don't forget the culture and each country's legal and cultural considerations. This is incredibly important and this will set you apart from the crowd. If you want to learn more, then I have an expanded hreflang guide on my website. So www.darioandseo.com, and it is the Speaking Your Href Language hreflang Starter Handbook, which was actually published in early August. And it is a 30-page guide with examples, what to do, what not to do, examples from big corporations, and even commentary from other awesome international SEO specialists. So if you want to give it a read, please do. It is probably going to take you a while, so make yourself a cup of tea, sit down with it, and really put your head down and read about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This presentation will be shared with you, I hope, Chris. And if you have any questions, please let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn, so you can scan the QR code and add me. Or you can follow me on Instagram. I don't actually post on it, but follow me anyway, because we all love the followers. And I'm sure you've been an absolutely wonderful audience, even though I can't see anyone. And I hope you all have the most wonderful day. Chris, thank you so much for bringing me on board. I really hope that I can meet everyone in real life next time. Thank you guys. Bye.